The British comedian Russell Brand characterized voting as, quote, a tacit act of complicity in a political system filled with lies, treachery, and deceit. He might not be alone in his thinking, especially among Canadian voters aged 18 to 24. Fewer than 40% of those eligible in that cohort voted in the 2011 federal election. Joining us now to share their views on the state of democracy in our country, Idil Birali. She is Studio Y Fellow at the Mars Discovery District. Omar Aziz, writer, journalist, and contributor to the Globe and Mail. Brady Bothwell, product designer at a marketing company in Toronto. Matt Lester, consultant at a Toronto-based recruitment firm. Justin Matthews, research associate at Queen's University and news director at Queen's TV. Chris Spoke, head of business development for the Toronto tech startup. And there we go. Welcome, everybody. This is a nice gathering of people who really should be very actively involved in politics, and we're going to find out why you're not. Russell Brand, who I guess you all know, said something on an interview show not that long ago that sort of got everybody, well, he hit a chord. So we're going to play that tape, and then we're going to come back and chat, okay? Roll tape, please.
It's not that I'm not voting out of apathy. I'm not voting out of absolute indifference and weariness and exhaustion from the lies, treachery, deceit of the political class that has been going on for generations now, and which has now reached fever pitch, where we have a disenfranchised, disillusioned, despondent underclass that are not being represented by that political system. So voting for it is tacit complicity with that system, and that's not something I'm offering up.
Well, why don't you change it then?
I'm trying to.
Well, why don't you start by voting?
I don't think it works. People have voted already, and that's what's created the current paradigm.
When did you last vote?
Never.
You've never, ever voted?
No.
Well, let's start with that. How many people around this table have at least ever voted? Hands up.
Yep.
You have all ever voted. Okay. Did anything Russell Brand say there speak to you?
Not particularly. I think I have a different opinion than him, where it's not necessarily apathy for my lack of engagement. I think for my situation, I have a fairly high level of trust in our government. I think things are functioning quite well, and for myself to be involved, I tend to get drawn out by certain issues. So I don't have a loss of faith in the system. I don't think I necessarily share kind of my peer group here in their opinion that they're not feeling like it's functioning. To me, everything seems to be going fairly well, but part of my reason for not turning out, I think, is not necessarily being drawn out. And I think for a lot of my generation, it's not necessarily what Russell Brand is saying, where to vote is to give credibility to what's happening. For me, it's more, I think it's simpler. People just aren't doing it because they're not being drawn out. They're not being engaged.
Brady, there's that old expression, don't vote, it just encourages them. Is that where you're at?
For me, I think that the voting, I don't think that the problem necessarily lies in voting so much as it lies in the party structure that exists surrounding the mandates that get set out.
What's the problem with
after
the party
voting.
structure?
Everyone just ties in, your trustee runs in your area, you vote for them, and they're supposed to represent your ideas, not the ideas of the broader party, right? I think that's the ideal sort of form of democracy. They're not just voting along a party line, they're not voting for a whipped piece of legislation, and I feel that voting for parties is the bigger problem, rather than if the representatives were more able to represent their constituencies, then that would be far less problematic.
Chris, he's touched on something here that I hear all the time,
Sure.
which is it the elected person's responsibility to represent the party to the constituency, or is it the elected person's responsibility to represent the views of his or her constituents to the party in Ottawa, in Queen's Park, whatever?
Sure.
Is that part of why you might be disillusioned with politics right now?
Not that specifically, although that is I think we don't have an optimal system set up to that effect. I think a lot of members of parliament aren't able to vote on their conscience because votes are whipped, and some issues are just outside the Overton window of what is acceptable discourse within a party. That's not what I'm concerned with. My main concern with democracy and democratic politics is that too many domains that shouldn't be subject to collective choice are made so by democratic politics. So I think a lot of policy issues, when they come up for a vote or as part of a platform, we're told or we're asked to vote yes or no on a set of policy proposals. And I think sometimes the correct answer is not yes or no, but it's none of your business in the first place whether this should be regulated or not. So for example, just to make this a little more concrete, we have a minimum wage law in Ontario. So you cannot hire somebody for less than the minimum wage. That is illegal. It's a voluntary transaction, and a third party, the government says, nope, sorry, you can't do it, even if the two parties involved in the actual transaction agree to it. So I disagree with that policy, and I think it's bad policy. I think it prices low-skilled labor out of the market, but I don't think it's good enough for me to vote against it. I think I should question the premise of whether this should be up to that third party, the government, to regulate in the first place.
But that's no reason not to vote, is it? The fact you disagree with the party on a particular piece of legislation?
It's about, as Russell Brand said, it's being complicit in that system where we're giving political parties the moral authority or the legal authority to have a say in the first place. I don't think they should.
Idil, do you have a problem with the role of the party in all of our democracy?
Yes, I do think that it's very narrow ideology amongst all three of them, and it's very hard to differentiate between them. But with Russell Brand, I would like to just problematize disengagement. I think people who consciously choose not to vote are engaging in the political system. They're saying that all of the above is irrelevant and we're not voting for you. So it'll be interesting to have a counter analysis of, well, here's a provincial government who only got 30% of the vote. A majority didn't vote for you. How does that make you feel? Rather than, just go with that 30%. So he's right. I agree with his analysis. I'm probably a hypocrite because I still vote. Even though he's right, I do feel like I'm supporting a system that isn't working. But at the same time, when he says that this system works for the elite, it's because he is convincing all the young progressives not to vote.
So why do you vote?
Because I believe in change.
So you don't agree with him then? You do believe that there is a power in voting?
There is a power in voting, especially when you depend on these services. Like, I'm aware of the fact that if I don't vote, transit cuts do affect me. If I don't vote, a lack of funding to affordable daycare will affect me later on when I become a mother. If I don't vote, gender mainstreaming and urban planning will affect me and whether I'm safe or not. So I rely on the system, whereas, he's a wealthy man. He can afford to move anywhere, but when you're a marginalized person, whether you're a gay person in California and there's a law basically saying you're not allowed to marry your love, that affects you. Would he still say, don't vote in that? And would he call the young people in the Middle East who fought for democracy that they're misguided for doing that? So I just feel like there is a question of privilege there.
Okay, understood.
Can I just touch on one thing she said? I think it was very important. You said Russell Brand, he has the opportunity to move if he doesn't like the current set of policies. And I think that's very important. When faced with political decision making, most people have two choices. They could exercise their voice, so they could vote or write a letter to the editor or protest, or they could exit the system altogether and vote with their feet. And that's what immigrants do by leaving their countries, leaving a system, not voting for change, but just leaving altogether. And I think exit is a lot more powerful and a lot more useful. And I think that's a great point. And what I would like to see is more opportunity for exit. So federalism, subsidiarity, right? Where if decision making is made at the lowest, most localized body of governance, it allows you the choice not only to vote for change, but also to move if you don't like it. And I think that puts a much greater constraint on political decision making than just exercising your voice.
I think that this all sounds great in theory, right? But
Which part?
Most of it. If you want to be apathetic, to me, I consider that a luxury, because if you look at other fragile democracies, if you don't vote, that could be the difference between your tribe getting shot. That could be a difference between you not having enough food on the table. That could be a difference between a war happening, as it is happening now. Russell Brand, for him to just kick up his feet and throw this slogan, "Fight the power, don't vote," don't give any more fodder to the crooks and criminals. I think that's a very easy thing to do. He has 7.5 million Twitter followers. He's worth $20 million. He's got an influential voice. Why don't you use that voice and platform and organize people, young people, who will listen to him? Why don't you mobilize folks and organize folks and get the change that you want to see? I mean, Britain's going to vote on there's going to be a referendum on Scottish independence in the near future. if the mechanisms for the destruction of the British state are within parliamentary democracy, I'm sure we can get good legislation through on youth unemployment or tuition rates or tech and all the other things that British youth want. I think it's self-serving and a little self-satisfying for him to just say don't vote and fight the power.
Justin, your view of the Russell Brand comments?
I feel like I'm sympathetic with his frustrations. There's something that upsets me about our democracy, and I think it's an alarming state right now. But I think he's a little, perhaps hypocritical or even a little delusional, because his choice, he leaves us pretty much no choice. He either says you're tacitly complicit in this broken system, or you just abstain from it and you're just not part of it at all. And he's not giving me any other choice other than the alternative being revolution. And I think that's where I totally disagree with him. I am sympathetic to him, but I think my disagreement is not the system itself, it's the people that are running it.
And also, what is his revolution? He doesn't offer an alternative world, right?
Utopian socialism in another article. I mean, it's
Massive
anachronistic, right? Like the British state's been around for a long time. Let's be honest, there's not going to be a revolution. The 1960s called and they want their politics back.
I think there's a challenge too where if you don't have the opportunity to exit,
Right.
taking the Russell Brand approach for our generation is a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you feel like, or I feel like I'm not being engaged by politicians, it's because they're already counting on me not really turning out to vote. So the more I continue to not vote, and I recognize this, which is why sometimes I turn out, the more I continue to not vote, the less likely they are to pander to my interests, and the greater the distance or gap that will eventually need to be bridged between what I'm looking for and what they're offering.
I want to go just around the table again and find out. You pointed out earlier that you all have, at one point in your lives, voted. But I want to find out, we had two elections in 2011, a federal and a provincial election. Hands up, who voted in the federal election that year? 1, 2, 3. You two did not. Why didn't you vote in the federal election that year?
You know what, I don't know.
Just
Yeah, I don't
you were
know.
not moved to vote.
Wasn't moved to vote. I don't think I was overly informed about it. I wasn't at a place in my life where it was kind of a top priority.
Wasn't on your agenda.
Wasn't on the agenda.
Brady?
I don't like the federal government and the policies that it implements generally don't I find that it doesn't affect me as much as municipal or provincial politics do. I didn't feel that the federal mandate of any of the parties really represented my views at the time, and I just didn't feel engaged at a federal level.
Okay, we talked about the federal election. Let's go around the table again and talk about the provincial election. There was a provincial election, October 2011. Hands up, who voted? Now that's interesting. You voted provincially but not federally.
Yeah.
How come?
Because I find that I believe in much more smaller I believe in smaller political sort of realms. I don't like the federalist, like I said before, the federalist system. I find it so just in knowing about how the party whip system works and how legislation gets pushed through. I find it to be relatively dirty. Whereas I think that the provincial politics, obviously they're subject to all the party plays that go on, but just it being that one increment smaller.
It's a little closer to you.
It's closer to
You
you.
felt it closer.
I feel like the representatives can be a little bit more representative of what I need or what I'm wanting.
You didn't vote either time?
Also didn't vote provincially.
Gotta be consistent.
Just not on your agenda again?
It wasn't on the agenda, and I think for me a lot of the issue too was that, to be quite blunt, I was uninformed. I wasn't up to date on issues. I'm going back a few years now, so I have to draw myself to that time. But I don't remember really having any sort of dialogue in my personal life, in my peer group, or through any of the methods that I get my news and my media through, which is Facebook, Twitter, and satire, basically. And
Satire is one of your chief
satire
sources of
I think
information.
it is probably a chief source of information
that's
at this
interesting.
point.
That's interesting.
So and maybe I'm making a little bit of a jump, but there was something weird to me where, and I don't want to pass the buck or push the onus, but it is weird to me that if there's somebody who is running for power who claims to represent my interests, that they wouldn't know how to communicate to me, because there's so many things in my life that I care about that really I shouldn't care about. The brand of suit that you wear, the color of car that you purchase.
Well, how do you want to be communicated to as a potential young voter?
I think that having things show up, to go kind of very baseline, having things show up in like my Facebook news feed, having things communicated in a way that has less barriers to entry. So I love articles like things that you can, they're a little bit of a clickbait, but 10 things that you don't know about Ukraine and are too embarrassed to ask.
You
Things
read
like that
No, fair
that
enough.
draw you in to get
but
you
if
started.
you saw, I think one of the things I hear all the time is, if I see a political party logo on a Facebook or Twitter message that comes into my inbox, I'm not looking at it. That's what I hear people say. And I'm seeing a lot of heads nod.
Yeah. And the thing is also with labels, the problem with when Gen Y is labeled as a thing, that's problematic too, right? Because we all have very different experiences and different views and different needs. So I remember when Justin Trudeau had his whole pro-marijuana stance, how a lot of articles display that as he's speaking to the Gen Y. For me, that was the biggest slap in the face. That basically meant we are irrelevant and that we care about petty things like that. When I'm more concerned about the things that campaigns like Generation Squeeze is talking about. Why is our federal government not investing in us? Will there be a retirement fund for us when we retire? Why is no one starting to invest in the people under 40? And at the same rate that they do with boomers, right? So those are things that I care about and that I think a lot of my friends care about, whether they know how to articulate it that way or not.
I appreciate that, but I want to return to this issue of how the parties are supposed to communicate with you on the platform on which you want to be communicated with, when as soon as you see their logo come across in your Facebook account or your Twitter account, you're moving on. How do they do it?
They don't know how to do it. Kathleen Wynne did the Ask Me Anything on Reddit, and it was widely considered a joke because she was giving prepackaged answers in a medium.
Questions.
Yeah, and in a medium.
600.
Exactly, in a medium where you're supposed to be forthcoming or at least appear forthcoming. And they need to be able to harness social media a little better. I mean, it's been done. Obama did in 2008. He rallied millions of young people to vote for him by appealing to their interests, but also using mechanisms that they use for information. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit,
It's not about
LinkedIn,
the medium,
even.
though. The problem I think we're all having is that they don't come across as genuine. It's not authentic.
They aren't genuine.
They're
A
talking
lot of
down
them.
to us, rather than talking with us.
It's become sort of like a marketing strategy. We're almost a consumer now.
Yeah.
So every time I'm on my Facebook news feed, I'm seeing sponsored by the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, the NDP Party. So it has very little to do with me, and it's more to do with, hey, here's something that you might like. Buy me, buy me, buy me. And that's all I'm seeing, and I feel almost insulted by that.
So what should they do?
It doesn't seem to be effective, though. If it's marketing, there's lots of marketing that's very effective to me. I get sucked into everything. I love being sold to, but it doesn't seem to be working because I'm not getting bought in, and I think maybe a piece of that is everyone on the panel, as they kind of discuss these issues, friend or peer group always seems to be brought up of, my friends hold this opinion or my peers are doing this, and my friend and peer group are generally disengaged, and there's a barrier to entry when there's a highly polarized division between groups of friends that are extremely political and people who are not political at all or engaged by any means.
But what's the barrier to entry? This is what I need to understand.
So the challenge for me, coming from a not very politically engaged peer group, walking up to a group that is extremely politically engaged, it's quite a gap to jump, and I feel like the nature of the conversation is very different, and it's almost hard to enter into the conversation and get to a point where I can become educated through a dialogue.
Chris, let me try
or a
this with
discussion.
you. A lot of the young people around your age, who I see, you're all 20-somethings, I assume, right? Okay. Who are involved in politics are really serious about politics. They are hip deep in it. And if anybody isn't, is that kind of zealotry, for lack of a better word, for a particular political party a real turnoff for people like you in terms of
Absolutely
getting into it yourself?
Yeah, I actually had the same experience as Omar did. When I started getting involved in conservative politics, I was a delegate at the convention in Winnipeg. I think it was 2008 or 9. And yeah, the young people there were very partisan, very loyal to the brand, not as a policy concern, but just kind of as an activity. And this is the team they chose. So I think that's definitely right. I also think it's worth mentioning that there's the disengagement I actually see as a positive trend. And speaking from my self-interest, the more we get young people to vote, the more effective the marketing is, the less likely I am to vote because the relative weight of my vote is diminished, right? So I think that I just want to question the whole premise of whether we should be encouraging more people to vote in the first place. But to your point, I think absolutely. The zealotry of the die-hard liberals, conservatives, NDP partisans is kind of weird and doesn't vibe with most people's experiences.
Justin, how about you? Is that zealotry a turnoff for you? Do you see it?
I do see it. Oh, Lord knows I see it. But I'm not sure if it's particularly a bad thing. I disagree with it. And I'd venture to say it's a lot worse than an uninformed voter because they're trained SEALs, more or less. But my issue is not that they're there. I think they should be there. They should be at the table. No matter who you are and what you're saying, you should be there. And that's the point of democracy to me. So whether or not they have the greatest ideas or they're simply saying what their parties have said, the point is that they're supposed to be there.
Okay. Can we do this clip, Trouble with Democracy? Want to go to that one right now? Roll tape.
Selfish, self-aggrandizing,
corrupt, opportunistic.
Oh gee, let's be polite, shall we? Insincere, rude,
conceited, self-obsessed,
cronyism,
partisan, salesy,
slimy. Slimy is a word.
Tough job. It's everyday people with really important jobs.
Some rather wildly divergent views on the best adjectives or nouns to use to describe politicians, but okay, those are some. Let's go around the table. Idil, let's hear some words that you would use to describe people who are involved in politics.
Inauthentic and short-sighted.
Inauthentic because what?
They're a package. They fit themselves into a mold, and they come across rehearsed and scripted, which makes it come across as inauthentic, and short-sighted because all of them think in a 4-year term, and it's all about getting reelected, not about building infrastructure or having a bold vision for the future of this country or city. There's none of that.
Is there a politician in the country today that you look at and say, you know what, they seem not too packaged, they seem pretty authentic?
Naheed Nenshi.
Mayor of Calgary.
Yes. But
right.
Sometimes if I pay too much attention, then I feel like he's doing that on purpose.
He's doing what on purpose?
The whole being like and cool thing. You know, because I'm sure he's aware of it now, right?
Yeah.
So now I feel I'm starting to do a double take and be like, now I feel like this is an act. There's no longer the authentic, cool guy.
Well,
Calgary.
even when he's authentic and cool, he can't win. You still are suspicious of why he's being that way.
Yes. This is what our Canadian
mayor.
democracy has done to us.
What's that?
We have a very authentic mayor in Toronto, for better or for worse. I
Yes,
think.
you do.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're okay on his
No,
type
not at
of
all. I just
authenticity.
to that point, to the point of authenticity, I think we rail against inauthenticity, rightfully so. But I think authentic isn't a virtue in and of itself. It's authentically good, right? Authentically bad is no better than inauthentic.
Okay. Omer, do we have a truly authentic politician in this country today that you would identify?
Oh, I gotta go with the hometown hero, Hazel McCallion, the mayor of Mississauga. She's been around for a long time, and I mean, there's the scandal, and don't want to get into that. But you know, you ask most people who live in that city, it's growing really fast, and they're content. You know, they're happy with the condition of the roads and their taxes and life in the city. I'd agree. Mayor of Calgary is another one. And there's some federal politicians. I think Justin Trudeau might be moving in that direction where he's trying to be authentic and genuine. Whether that's going to bode well for him in the election next year.
Well, this is where I'm going to quibble with you. I don't know that you could try to be authentic and genuine. Either you are or you aren't. I mean, that's part of it.
Yeah, but you have to be packaged to an extent. I mean, look, this is a democracy. You have to win an election. If you don't win an election, you can't get anything done. And to a certain extent, you have to, you know, do some marketing ploys and be a little Machiavellian and play the game.
Just tell me your ideas. Have a conversation with me.
Yeah, but I mean, look, if you don't win an election, you have to be a little bit of Frank Underwood, right? You have to get the. You have
no,
to.
don't ever be like Frank Underwood.
You have to.
35 minutes in, we finally get a House of Cards reference. All right, good stuff.
You have to get the political machinations done when you win an election and when you're in the House. That's the nature of parliamentary democracy. Politics is by definition divisive. I might not agree with you on position X, and we're going to sit down, we're going to have a disagreement about it, and we're going to take it to the people, right? And that's the nature of the game. And you don't have to play too dirty. I mean, but you're going to have to play.
There's obviously, Matt, not a politician in the country or the province who moved you enough to get you to cast an X on
It's
a
like you're
ballot.
looking deep into my soul.
I can tell. But do you look now? I mean, this is now 2.5 years later since the last election. The last federal election, anyway. Do you see any politicians in this country who are authentic?
Not at the moment. I would echo kind of the same sentiment.
None?
It's disingenuous. There's too much gamery, and I get a lot of gobbledygook from kind of what politicians, or when I hear them speaking or I see their messaging, because I think it's very different than running a business and being a CEO and having the buck stop at you, and things are going to work or they're not going to work, but you're going to move forward either way. And instead, it's more of a cautious strategy game of chess. It's less about saying the right thing and more about not saying the wrong thing to make sure you're scooping everyone in off of the margins. Mm-hmm. And for me, I'd like to see a little bit more balls.
I think you mean what? Authenticity.
Authenticity, or just someone who's willing to be a little bit more straightforward and put it on the line, whether it's going to work or not.
Got it. You were going to say?
No, I was going to say, there's that old saying that a gaffe is when a politician tells the truth, and the media doesn't really help either, because when there are gaffes, right, they're just replayed and looped and discussed and analyzed over and over and over again. And that makes politicians very, very, very cautious, and I don't blame them.
Winston Churchill said the greatest argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. So the media and the opposition parties, they jump on these comments because they know they will play well to their base. And they'll play well to the voting public. And I think that's the problem with democracy, is just that the voting public is not sophisticated enough for us to put too much power in their hands, I think.
We talked earlier, right near the top of the program, about how many of you might at one point ever want to get involved in politics, and I didn't see any hands go up. But I gather when you were in university, you did have a conversation with a professor about that.
Yeah.
How did that go?
Well, I was on break from Cambridge, and I went to go visit Professor Nossel, who was really well known.
Hang on, go back. You were on break from Cambridge?
Yeah, on holiday. I was doing grad school there.
You went to Cambridge?
Yeah, did international relations.
Nice.
And I went into the office of Professor Kim Nossel, who teaches political science, and I told him that, I'm interested in being involved in politics. And his eyebrows went up, and he just looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, why? And I just sort of blurted out, because I'm interested in public service. And he looked at me as if I was either naive or insane for connecting politics with public service. And I think that's the division, that divorce, that between politics on the one hand, which is full of crass and crude people and considered Machiavellians, and public service on the other hand, which is considered generous, compassionate, selfless, and people who do public service go into NGOs, they go volunteer abroad, they work for international organizations, and people who go into politics are considered these sort of bad human beings that just want to appeal to their own self-interest and win votes.
Is there nobody at this table who thinks that politics is a form of public service?
I think, I would say that.
You would grant that?
Yes.
I would too.
You would too?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have a few people who want to disagree with your professor here.
I mean, how many people would you say that are in politics now, all the people that we're criticizing, how many are in it just for public service, just to serve the public good?
True.
You were saying that, they just spout rhetoric and they don't get anything done. Could you say those people are trying to serve the public interest and do public service, and that's their primary goal? I don't know.
I think they start off good. I think most people get into politics to make a difference in their communities or speak up for a proportion of the community that isn't spoken for. But then eventually it's the system that eats them up, right? It's either the party that wheels them in, or it's the election cycle that makes them more practical and speaking in real politics instead of being idealist and thinking of what they can change. But I would say that initially all of them start good.
Can we define public service? And I, as a member of the public, could I refuse their service if I don't want it?
Serving the public, I mean, whether you're volunteering abroad or you're standing up to run in an election.
I'm served by corporations that provide me with goods and services at an affordable price for me to live my life. I'm served by my landlord who provides me with housing. I don't think I'm served by politicians. You're also served by
highways and hospitals and schools and things that we all pay for, right?
And I don't think that's the ideal way to provide for these services. But I just want to question the fact that public service, we set it apart from the private sector. We set it as this thing that politicians or NGOs or people do selflessly. I don't think the political self-interest is any more noble than corporate self-interest, and I'm not sure that public service through politics is much of a service at all, actually.
You don't think there's any distinction to be made between somebody running for office and serving the public that way and somebody who develops a better form of cheese and wants to
I think both are self-interested. Both are self-interested. The politician Their motivations might be different. One might be a profit motive, the other might be a power motive, but they're both self-interested, and I think that's the connecting, that's the constant.
With the capitalist, though, it stops at the profit motive, right? That is your baseline. Whereas for politics, you have to get things done for your community. You have to get things done for the country.
Right, but the profit motive is only made possible by getting things done. I think that's a much more effective metric.
I just think we're not just shareholders, we're citizens. I think there's a difference.
I have a very different perspective from this. I think that I have the benefit of sort of working on my prof's research, and I can't tell you anything about the findings, but I can't tell you about what the research is.
Who's the prof?
Heather Bastido.
This is at Queen's?
Yes.
Okay.
And the research is about what the work of MPs at Parliament and at home, and so how do they represent their constituents. And so part of my work is to do background profiles on how certain MPs got into power, how they were elected, and I sort of learn the story of them in their ridings. And I'm actually floored. Some of them are awesome. They're incredible. They do incredible work, and we sort of tend to give them the bad rap that is a trained seal or even a furry cat. You know how the cats, they give you attention, but when they want something from you.
However you want to characterize the interest that your parents have and have had in politics, do you want the same kind of politics or do you want a different kind of politics? And if it's different, what do you want?
I think it's the voter behavior that has changed. I think my generation has less time. We are squeezed for time. We study longer, work harder, and we're just always on the go. So I think the disengagement is just out of a lifestyle that we can no longer afford. So I would like to be more engaged in politics. I would like to be able to follow it more, but I just feel like the current lifestyle that we're building is not gonna enable that. And I feel like nothing will change, however, if I don't become more engaged and if I don't advocate for my generation to be looked after by the current status quo.
Okay, Chris, you want a different politics or the same politics of your parents?
I want a different politics, and I think my approach to politics will be much different. So to provide an analogy, one thing that I've noticed, some of you might be familiar with the application Uber, where you could call a private town car on your phone.
It's like a taxi service.
That's right. So Travis Kalanick, the CEO, he has done more to deregulate the taxi industry in 70 cities around the world than any politician, any group of politicians. And I think that's very powerful. So my parents, they might be interested in seeing some competition in a free market for healthcare, for example. And their way of going about that is waiting for the politician to propose it or advocate for it and vote for that politician. I would much rather found a company offering medical tourism brokerage services to Canadians to go outside of Canada, get your teeth fixed in South Korea and come back. And I think that's much more effective. I'm much more able to do it because I don't have to pull together this coalition of like-minded individuals. I could just do it. And I think that is a profoundly political act, and it's much more interesting to me.
Okay. Brady.
I think that the whole playbook for how the parties approach people is written for the boomers, right? Because it's largely boomers that are in power right now. They know how to speak to their own demographic, and I think that is a core problem with it because they're also very stuck in their ways. They want to retire. They want to have that comfortable place to go to, and they grew up with, I'm turning 28 this month. And at this point in time in my parents' life, they'd be buying a house, they'd be like thinking about having kids. It's a very different thing than where we are now, given the economy that they set up, given the rules that they've been playing by.
So you
over
want
the
a different
course of
politics
time.
in your
Absolutely.
Folks. Justin.
I actually don't want politics of my parents. I want maybe my grandparents. A return to I guess when parties were speaking to all Canadians and not just particular segments like the immigrant community or a different community over there. And I also want a different kind of politician. We used to have moral champions, heroes, people who inspired us. It's a little well wishful, but I think in the absence of a hero, we can take someone who we'll have a beer with or have a coffee. And I think that's why Rob Ford is still kind of popular despite his personal life. I think it's people like that we need.
Omer.
Well, I think Rob Ford's really popular because, there's an ideology that people want. But my parents came here in the 1970s, and I obviously wasn't around then, but I had this romantic vision of the 70s as, Trudeau and Joe Clark, and then later on Brian Mulroney, where politics was exciting and it was cool, and there was big things that were being debated in Ottawa and Queen's Park. And I want better people to run for office and to tackle difficult issues head on, and to use 21st century technology, use social media and talk to people in a language that appeals to them. And we've got big issues to deal with this in this century, and I hope that more individuals get involved. That's the only way we're going to be able to deal with them.
There is a member of the Ontario cabinet today who came over from Pakistan as a teenager. His father had been in prison over there.
Yeah.
He's now a cabinet minister today.
Yeah, and anything's possible, and that's why so many immigrants flock here. It's because they believe in it. And for us to be, we're really disillusioned here. But if we had an open immigration policy, our population would be, 200 million or something. It's we have a system here that a lot of people around the world yearn for, and I hope that we don't take that for granted.
Matt, how about you?
I think it has to be different. It has to change. My ask would be, I turn out to stuff where there's a social pressure in my peer group to go and do things, and there's a level of discussion in that peer group that encourages me to go and source out further information and explore issues myself to form an opinion. So my ask would be, I don't have that now in my peer group. I'm always open to a conversation. So for the hyper-political people, when you're having a conversation with someone who maybe doesn't get it, have it be more of an exploration as opposed to a regurgitation.
Approach gently as opposed to with a sledgehammer.
I'm not ready for prepackaged arguments to be thrown at me. I want to explore and feel around and have it be less of a political conversation and approach it more like a scientific dialogue where you talk to a physicist and you're not a physicist. They don't have the expectation that you would have an understanding of their subject matter expertise, and you get to play with ideas, and it's about testing and challenging ideas and hypothesis as opposed to reinforcing a package of party ideals.
Gotcha. Good to have you all around the table today. Like to see you out at the polls next time, but we'll see. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.